Hi, I'm Natalie Maines, and I support the West Memphis Three. Blind justice is the theory that law should be viewed objectively. Determination of innocence or guilt should be made without bias or prejudice. Equal justice under law is the foundation of the U.S. Supreme Court, but this is not always indicative of fairness. Almost 15 years ago, Damien Echols, Jason Baldwin, and Jessie Misskelley were wrongly convicted of the murders of 3 young children in West Memphis, Arkansas. Learn about the new evidence that exonerates them.
14 and a half years ago, the gruesome murders of 3 8-year-old boys shocked West Memphis, Arkansas. Stevie Branch, Christopher Byers, and Michael Moore, second-grade playmates, were found beaten to death, naked and bound in shallow water. Police arrested 3 teenagers, including an alleged devil-worshipping ringleader named Damien Echols. Echols and 16-year-old Jason Baldwin denied involvement, but 17-year-old Jessie Misskelley confessed, telling authorities they killed the boys after a chance encounter in the woods. Misskelley, who defense attorneys claim has a low IQ, now says the confessions were coerced. Despite a lack of significant physical evidence linking the teens to the crime, all 3 were found guilty. Echols was sentenced to death.
The first verdict reads as follows: We, the jury, find Damien Echols guilty of capital murder in the death of Stevie Branch. We, the jury, find Damien Echols guilty of capital murder in the death of Chris Byers.
From the Varner unit at Supermax State Prison Facility in Grady, Arkansas, we're joined by Damien Echols, who is on death row. He recently had a birthday, by the way. He's 33 years old. How long have you been on death row?
About 14 years. All in all, I've been locked up almost 15 years.
Now, there's so-called, let's get into it, new evidence in your case. It's encouraged a lot of your defenders, and there are many, to feel optimistic. Give us the story. What's new?
There are several things, but I think the main one is probably the DNA testing. They said it revealed no evidence of me or the other 2 guys who were convicted of this crime at the crime scene. There was also evidence that said that what the prosecution had alleged were knife wounds, things of that nature, were actually more along the lines of post-mortem injuries inflicted by snapping turtles and other things that would have been in the woods.
We are here today to discuss the evidence that establishes that no reasonable juror would convict Damien Echols, essentially knowing what we know today. But let me begin in 1993 with the arrest of Damien Echols.
In a statement given to police and obtained by a Memphis newspaper, 17-year-old Jessie Misskelley allegedly confesses to watching 2 other suspects choke, rape, and sexually mutilate 3 West Memphis second graders. Jenna Newton reports.
According to the published report, Misskelley told police he watched 18-year-old Damien Echols and 16-year-old Jason Baldwin brutalize the children with a club and a knife. At a press conference, Inspector Gary Gitchell said the case against the accused teens is very strong.
Scale of 1 to 10, how solid do you think the case is?
11.
The only problem is that the statement of Gary Gitchell that convinced the citizens of this state that it was true was absolutely false. He knew, he had to know, that then as now, there was not a single piece of credible evidence that tied Damien Echols to these crimes. The 2 pieces of evidence that existed at that time were a statement by a woman who was facing embezzlement charges that she would play detective, find out what went on in this case. She knew Misskelley, and she told the police that as a detective, Misskelley had taken her with Damien Echols to a satanic SBAT. Her name was Vicki Hutchison. What do we know today about Vicki Hutchison? Every word was a lie. A complete fabrication, a product of police pressure to get the results in the deaths of 3 children. That's one piece of evidence. The second piece of evidence, of course, was the statement taken from Jessie Misskelley.
And the police picked him up, and who knows what they did to him for 12 or 14 hours before they finally say that he confessed. The problem was, once he did confess, pretty much not a single detail of what he said was right.
Misskelley was borderline retarded. He was told when he said he wasn't involved in satanic activity that he had failed a polygraph on that question. He didn't fail the polygraph. He said that he marched the boys off, he took them off their bikes while they were on their way to school at 9 o'clock in the morning. At 9 o'clock in the morning, those boys were in school, as they were all of that day.
Detective Ridge says, all right, when did you go with them? Mr. Misskelley says, that morning. Detective Ridge asks, I'm not saying when they called you, I'm saying what time was it that you were actually there in the park? Mr. Misskelley says, about noon. Detective Ridge now says, okay, was it after school had let out? This is immediately after Jessie saying it's at noon. He's now suggesting it must be later by saying, is it after school let out? Jessie says yes.
And Misskelley said they were tied with brown rope. No one could not know they were tied with their own shoelaces from their sneakers. He said one victim was choked to death. Absolutely false. None of the victims were choked. The boys, he said, were beaten with their clothes on, badly beaten with their clothes on. All of their clothes were recovered. There was no blood on them. They take this statement to a judge. He refuses to give a warrant. He says, you've given me a statement that doesn't describe these crimes. They occurred in the evening, not in the morning. They go back to Misskelley in the interrogation and tell him that he had said that it was 8 o'clock at night, which he never had. They supplied the time. So when Gary Gitchell says 11 out of 10, he's talking about 0 on a scale of 10.
Good morning. I'm going to take a minute or two here just to review some of the DNA evidence that has recently surfaced in the case. Relevant items from the crime scene were tested at the laboratory chosen by the prosecution, and that's Bodie Laboratories in Virginia. In late 2005, Bodie issued its first report showing DNA profiles of genetic material found on the victims and on other pieces of evidence from the crime scene. The lab was later given DNA samples both from the victims and the defendants. It analyzed those. In the end, none of the Bodie reports could link any of the DNA provided by the defendants to the victims or to the crime scene. One report showed a piece of genetic material in the penis of Stephen Branch that could not be linked to any victim or to any defendant. In the meantime, our investigators were obtaining DNA samples in the form of hair, cigarette butts, oral swabs from people who had some connection to the events. These included samples from several people, including Stephen Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs. And later we received a sample voluntarily given by David Jacoby, a friend of Terry Hobbs who was with Terry Hobbs on the day Stephen disappeared. We gave all these samples to Thomas Fedor, who's here today. He's an independent forensic serologist at the Serological Research Institute in California. Tom analyzed the samples and compared them to the testing results Bodie had already given us. The result of that analysis in May 2007 showed that a hair from a ligature used to tie up Michael Moore could be associated with Terry Hobbs. We provided that result to the prosecution right after learning of it. A much more recent analysis by Mr. Fedor showed that a hair found on a tree root or a tree stump at the crime scene could be associated with the DNA samples provided by David Jacoby.
If the West Memphis Three are innocent, as Damien Echols supporters claim, then someone had to have murdered the 3 boys.
Terry Hobbs, I don't have any problem with saying his name. In my opinion, yes, I believe he is the perpetrator of this crime.
A recent DNA test found hair fibers on one of the victims' shoelaces matched Terry Hobbs. He was Steve Branch's stepfather, but the DNA wasn't found on Stevie's shoelace. Hobbs claims it was a casual transfer to one of Stevie's friends who spent time at their house. We asked Terry Hobbs to comment. He declined.